How can you deal with transitions in your career as a civil engineer? I'm here today at Coffman Engineers in Honolulu. I'm going to speak with Jami Hirota, the Department of Civil Engineering Manager, and she's going to give some great tips on dealing with transitions and helping you to be the best civil engineer you can be. Let's do it. Anthony Fasano from the Engineering Management Institute, and I'm excited to be here at the office of Coffman Engineers in Honolulu. I'm here with Civil Engineering Department Manager Jami Hirota. This is one of our Women in Civil Engineering episodes of the Civil Engineering Podcast. And Jami, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start by giving our audience a little bit of background on yourself. Tell us how you got to this point in your career as a civil engineer.
Okay. I grew up in Central Illinois and attended Purdue University. While I was at Purdue, I met my husband senior year, and who's also a civil engineer. And we stayed in Indiana for about 18 months after graduation so that he could finish his master's. During that time, I worked for the city of Indianapolis. And then we got married, and 5 days later, moved to Hawaii. And 2 days after that, I went to work for my father-in-law in what was the third generation family business of civil engineering and land surveying. So I spent 22 years in that business.
Wow.
And last year, my husband and I decided to move away from the family business. And we were fortunate enough to know some folks at Coffman, and we've been here ever since, and have really enjoyed the move and the change of scenery from being in a family business for such a long time.
Sure. Now, how big was that family business? Was it a small business?
It was a small business, about 20 people,
okay.
Both land surveying and civil. So we had a small civil group and 2 or 3 survey parties.
So maybe you could talk for a minute about some of the benefits, I think, of working. I mean, I worked for a small civil firm myself, and it helped me to kind of, especially early in my career, to learn about a lot about things. Did you find that was helpful?
I did. I have a lot of great experience, I think, because a lot of times there is no one else to do the job you're doing, and you get put into situations where maybe you're not prepared for it, but you have to step up to the table and do what you're told. And a lot of benefit, too, to having surveying with the civil engineering. I learned a lot about collecting data and manage how the survey really plays such a vital role in the engineering piece of the work we were doing. And
that's great. I mean, I think that is one of the most important things that I learned. I started, as a surveyor in the field myself, and when I got into the office and I had to do design work, I had a much better, I think, handle on it, knowing how the project is kind of built from the ground up. So I think that is a really good benefit. So there are benefits to working at different size firms throughout your career, which is great. And then, you made this transition, but I think even before that, you made this decision to come to Hawaii, and your husband's family is from Hawaii.
My husband's family is here. He always knew that he was coming back. Even after 8.5 years in Indiana, he knew that he wanted to come back and work in the family firm, and convinced me to do that. It is, for anyone who thinks they want to move to Hawaii, it is a difficult transition, and a lot of people don't recognize that. Initially, I had a local family to help me with that transition, but it does take a while. It's a different place. It's a different culture. And after 22 years, I could say that I would never leave by choice, but
it wasn't that easy.
But it wasn't that easy.
So let's talk about civil engineering in Hawaii a little bit, because it also is different, of course, than the mainland. There's everywhere in the world has differences in civil engineering from state to state, from region to region, from municipality to municipality. But I think in Hawaii, there's some unique situations. One of them being that, the stormwater discharges to the ocean everywhere. So how does that impact kind of regulations and design?
It has a big impact, and I actually just did a presentation on stormwater management here because we're seeing a lot more government regulation on that, because, like you say, on the island of Oahu, we have an average day, we have 2 billion gallons of rain falling from the sky, and about 30% of that is going straight to the ocean. So it's become, as we've seen our reefs degrade, it's become a really important thing for us to have better water quality before discharge. We've got a really healthy aquifer that gives us pristine water, and we want to make sure that that is protected. So there's a lot of things that we do here to ensure that we're maintaining the health of that aquifer, and that we're trying to get groundwater recharge. And so in 2017, the city and county finally came through. They had been given a mandate by the EPA to come through and really relook at all of our stormwater management techniques. And
so what does that entail for, like, I mean, just for some examples in terms of, like, if you're working on a site and you're doing a stormwater design, is there like different systems, or is it the time that you retain the water? Like, what are some things that you need to maybe do here?
Well, they're trying to look at it holistically from the day we start disturbance to the
finished product.
The finished product. So there's a lot more regulation on the erosion sediment control side now, and the management of water during construction. We have on this island on Oahu, we have a lot of clay soils, so it's difficult to manage water because we don't get good percolation rates and infiltration rates. So that was the first piece of it, was really to bring our stormwater management during construction up to par. And then for the long term, looking at alternatives, because we don't have good infiltration rates, to try and do more groundwater recharge through terrible soils. So
it's very challenging.
It is very challenging. And what's unique about Hawaii is every island has different soil characteristics. So if you go to the Big Island, it is a lava field, really. I mean, it's an active volcano, and all you have to do is find a hole, and the water will go through it. So we treat each island differently as to how we're managing stormwater.
And Coffman does work on all of the islands.
We do work on all the islands.
And beyond that, of course.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to me as a civil engineer, because you do really need to think through the different characteristics of every island, and you're dealing with this. I did a lot of stormwater work, and so I could imagine, my first thought was maybe when we talked about, water getting to the ocean, my first thought was maybe you can use some infiltration techniques, but apparently that's not going to work too well here in Oahu. So I could see how that could present some challenges. Now, how about public work here? I know there's a lot of roadways, there's highways. Is there a lot of work just in general for civil engineering?
There is a lot of work. There has been a lot of work more recently. The EPA has not been friendly to the state of Hawaii. Stormwater is one issue we've had. Sewer effluent is another issue. There's a lot of work right now trying to upgrade our treatment plants because they all discharge to the ocean, of course. We also have a mandate now. We used to be a community built on cesspools, especially in the outer fringes of the islands. Those are disappearing. They're no longer allowed. So there's a lot of wastewater work that people are doing. We're very fortunate. We have a large military presence. So
there's work there as well.
There's a lot of federal work. The positioning of Hawaii in the Pacific region for the federal initiatives is changing, and it's brought more people to Hawaii, more troops. Different facilities are required, so we're seeing a big upswing in that.
Okay. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, is your husband a civil engineer as well?
He's a civil engineer and licensed land surveyor.
Okay. So my wife is a civil engineer as well, so, married civil engineers. But, this is part of our Women in Civil Engineering series, and I know, one of the reasons I started this, my wife has, struggled a little bit with confidence. There's a lot more men in the field than women, of course. I think in our graduating class, my wife was one of the few female engineers. For you, in terms of being a female in the industry, how has it impacted you? Or, what would you say about that to other, women civil engineers that are kind of up and coming in their careers or just getting ready? We get a lot of contact about all the young female engineers say, I'm excited, I'm a little bit nervous, but what could you say to them?
Right. So I was very fortunate in that I attended Purdue, and there is a strong women in engineering program at Purdue. It's a strong recruitment and retention program. I was part of that while I was there for 3 years, trying to educate young females on what it is to be an engineer and the challenges they will face. So I felt like I came out of school fairly well prepared. I had all female engineering roommates. I had a strong community of female engineers around me, which was really, really helpful. And I never, even though I've been, I was in a firm for years, we only had one other female engineer. I never felt that I was at a disadvantage of. I'm also fortunate in Hawaii because of the cultural diversity that's here. I think you tend to see a lot more tolerance for females because we have so many different ethnicities. Right. That being a woman is not necessarily a detriment.
That's great. I mean, it's great that Purdue had that in place as well. I think, any time you can get that support early on in your career is really invaluable because then, you have it with you as you go through different transitions. And that's another thing. It seems like you've gone through some different transitions in your career from moving from Indiana to Honolulu, which was obviously a big transition. Then, working with the family company for 22 years and then having another transition recently. How have you kind of managed those transitions or how did you get through those transitions?
They're always a struggle. I mean, I got married and was on a plane to Hawaii, moved in with my in-laws, went to work for my father-in-law all within a week period of time. Wow. And it was a challenge and it took a long time. I now had this boss who was also my father-in-law and
new father-in-law.
Yeah. It was, and, I guess I just had to put my head down and work through it. Right. And I was fortunate that my husband was standing next to me through all of this. And he was very helpful, in making sure that I stayed in the industry that I chose and I really love, because, there were a couple of points in time when I thought it might be easier to go do something else.
Sure.
And I know, coming out of such a strong women in engineering program, I know a lot of women who never actually practiced engineering.
Yeah, right. For a lot of those reasons.
Yeah, for a lot of those reasons. And have gone on to do amazing other things. And I always tell people you can do a lot of things with an engineering degree. You don't have to be a practicing engineer. Right. But it makes life a little easier if you can get through those 4 years. And the sky's the limit.
Yeah. And then how about this most recent transition coming over to Coffman? How was that like for you, being with that kind of smaller family-owned business for a long time, with different things going on there? One, it's probably smaller. Secondly, you have, it's family-owned. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that transition. How did that go for you?
Well, that transition was years in the making. And it was based on a lack of succession planning that was happening in the firm we were in and my frustrations with that. And I knew at my age that I wanted to go into a firm that was really thinking about the future and had good succession planning in place already. So I was looking for firms that were forward thinking. Yep. Unfortunately, a lot of local firms are not like that. They're small local firms. Right. Very similar from what I came from. And, it wasn't easy to leave the firm. It wasn't acceptable to my father-in-law for us to leave the firm that he thought that we would take over at some point. Yeah. And it was part of our identity. I mean, our kids grew up in that business. Right. We went to that office every single day for 22 years. Yeah. I mean, and, but for the long-term stability of my family, I really felt that it was time for us to move on. And when I went out looking, you know, the opportunity to go to kind of a more of a mid-sized firm was enticing, because all the resources we didn't have in place in the small family-owned business are here.
Right.
And all the things that, you know, we used to joke about, you know, we had to make sure the lights came on every day, and
right.
and when the roof leaked, we had to get, you know, all those things that took away from my engineering career, right, are taken care of now. And it's a breath of fresh air. It's not easy with our family, of course. There was, you know, we will forever deal with the issue of leaving the family business. Right. I spent 10 years on the Family Business Center of Hawaii board, and you know, it happens. It happens in any business. If people don't plan for succession, right, you know, your business could fail. And
wow, those are some interesting decisions that you had to make in transitions. And I think, you know, you make some really good points in terms of like some of the resources that are available at a little bit larger firms. So I think there's always a good balance, because I always get questions from engineers about that. Like, should I work for a small company or a large company or a mid-sized company? And really, there's no right answer. I mean, they all have their benefits. They all have some risks associated with them. And, you know, I mean, I worked for a very small company in the beginning of my career. And I'm sure like you, I wouldn't trade it in for anything, because I really learned a lot of the fundamentals of engineering there, like the surveying. But then I also moved to kind of a mid to larger size firm at one point in my career. And again, the resources were there. There was different benefit resources. There was different things that were just more beneficial for me. So I think you just always need to think about your, you know, whether it's family that's driving a decision, your career development, how that's going to progress in different situations and opportunities. And there's no really one right answer for everybody, but hopefully from some of the things that, you know, Jami's talking about, you can use some of that to help you guide, you know, maybe some of your decisions. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, managing the civil engineering department here. I know it's been growing rapidly. I think you said when you started here recently, it was 2 people. Was it a year ago that you started here?
Yep, I started a year ago. We had 2 people. Coffman is multidiscipline. And in this office, we have civil, structural, fire protection, mechanical, and electrical engineers. You know, and the civil team was really, at that time, supporting the multidiscipline effort, some small projects, and came over, brought a few projects with me, and we went from 2 up to 7 really quickly to try and manage the project load that we had during what is a very difficult time in the labor market. If we could hire 1 or 2 more people, I'd love to do it.
Yeah. Wow. So you're really busy.
Yeah, it's been, you know, I've been really fortunate. Hawaii is a community based on relationships. You know, my husband and I've been here a long time. Right. Know a lot of people, have had a lot of clients, and are fortunate that we've had some really good clients who saw us as a couple worth moving their business with, right, to make sure that they continue to get the good service that they become accustomed to. So
that's great. Which speaks to, like, you know, how civil engineering is a real personal profession, right? A lot of relationships are really important. We talk a lot about that at EMI. You know, building relationships should just be like a secondary component to your career as a civil engineer that you kind of just have to do regardless of what experience level you're at, because they're going to help you out one way or another. So for sure, that's a big deal. But let's talk a little bit about like management and kind of like your management philosophy. You have a department of 7 people. I know for engineers, sometimes it's difficult in terms of figuring out, like, you're more hands-on as a manager, hands-off, you know, kind of maybe there's an important mix. What's your kind of take on that? Because I know it can be hard sometimes as, like, we're project-oriented people, probably started our careers like that, and then at one point we needed to make that transition. So how do you kind of manage that?
Well, and it was interesting coming from a business in which there were 2 of us that managed all the people, but we weren't the boss, and we were never considered the boss. So it was kind of, you know, I was in this real project manager role, even 22 years into a business, kind of with responsibilities that surpass project management. But, you know, on a day-to-day basis, I was still in trying to get the crews to the right site and making sure that the construction drawings were getting done on time. So I kind of had to just be one of the, even though my name was on the door, had to just be one of the guys and working weekends and doing everything that everyone else was expected to do. So I kind of came up in that model of, we tried to work smarter and more efficiently, but a lot of times it's a business of when times are good, you work hard. And so when I transitioned over to a slightly larger organization that has a different philosophy on management a bit. The managers we're no longer project managers. We're managing teams of people. Right. And I also walked into a group where I had staff who were older than me. And that can be challenging. Yeah, and it's been a little bit of push and pull because it was a small department. Everybody kind of did their own thing, and to now have a more organized group has been a challenge to make sure that we're all moving along together. And I always have the philosophy that I like to hire people who are self-motivated, who come to me to help them solve their technical problems and manage their clients when they need the assistance. But, they're accountable for themselves. And when I don't get staff that are like that, it can be a challenge because I like to tell everybody that I'm not a micromanager, that you shouldn't have to talk to me every day unless you need to come to me as the resource.
That's great. So your kind of philosophy is, want someone that could, do what they have to do on their own. Mm-hmm. If they need help, I'm here and available to help them. But I want them to kind of take the initiative and take their projects and
that came from being in a small business where, pretty early on we had to take on a lot of responsibility, and the senior engineers were there to assist us when we needed it, but you just kind of get thrown in the fire, and that's, I think, how you learn a lot. I learned a lot in those 20 years, and I wasn't pigeonholed into doing one specific task because there were 50 other people who could do the other tasks. So it's a well-rounded experience that I had.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's like one of the keys really to good management is that balance between, too much management where they're not getting that ability to develop, they're not getting thrown to the fire because you're always there to help them, and the opposite, which is go do this project and I'll see you when you're done in a month type of thing. So there's definitely a balance, but I agree that I think sometimes people go a little bit too over the top, and then it can kind of stunt the development a little bit because one day they are going to have to deal with a client on their own, and if they never had that experience, it's just not going to be that easy to do. What would you say would be one of the biggest changes for you coming to Coffman in terms of just your career as a whole?
I am really appreciative of our GM here, who again, is there to be the support mechanism for the management staff in this office, and is a great cheerleader. I didn't come from an organization where I had a cheerleader looking out for me.
So that support's been really helpful.
It's been really helpful, and any initiative that I want to take with new clients and new project leads, he is always there to kind of be the cheerleader and be the guy that's willing to let us go out on the limb and chase new business pursuits. And it's given me new energy that, kind of when you get into your 40s, you either it can get stagnant. I mean, you're doing the same thing over and over, and it's been great to come in, have smiling faces every day, and know that what I'm doing, someone is appreciating. And I always want to try and let my staff know that I'm appreciating all the work that they're doing too. It flows all the way down. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important and sometimes overlooked. And, we just get caught up in the day-to-day project grind, and we don't always recognize what others are doing. I've talked to a lot of younger engineers that get frustrated because they're not kind of not like they want a raise or anything. They just want someone to say thank you kind of to them. So I think that's a big deal. Again, we're here at Coffman Engineers. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with Jami and finish up with our civil engineering hot seat segment. No pressure, but it'll be fun. We'll be back in a minute.
I hope you are enjoying this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast, which is produced by the Engineering Management Institute. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for more podcast episodes and for all of our Engineering Manager 80/20 Shorts videos that we publish weekly, where we interview successful engineering managers. Now it's time to jump into our Civil Engineering Hot Seat segment.
All right, we're back at Coffman Engineers in Honolulu with Jami Hirota, the Department Manager for Civil Engineering. Jami, it's time for the Civil Engineering Hot Seat. You ready?
Go for it.
All right, first question. Do you have any rituals or routines that you practice on a daily basis that help you in your career, in terms of management, and any kind of routines at all that might be helpful for you, you've helped you with your success?
Okay. Well, I do two things now, and maybe I've learned them in my older age, but I started meditating several years ago, initially in response to managing my children better, but I find that it is a great way to start my day and kind of level my mind so that when I come into the office, I'm much more focused and not so quick to respond. So.
Right. So is that something you do every day, every morning?
I do it every morning and in the evening before I go home and start cooking dinner. The other thing that I've learned that I try to block out my Tuesdays so that if I can, I don't have any meetings on Tuesdays. And I've become better about blocking out my own personal time because, as many managers know, sometimes you walk in the door and your day has become somebody else's day because you just get eaten up with everybody else's issues, and it makes you very reactionary. So I'm trying not to be as reactionary. So if I can, I try to block out Tuesdays because that is the most efficient day of the week. Okay.
Do you block it out for something specific, or just whatever you need to work on?
I try to schedule my time during the day. I will make appointments for myself on certain tasks that have to get done.
I see.
So I hold myself accountable for those tasks. I recommend to my staff that when they have certain tasks that when I've given them something that has to get done, that they make a calendar invite to themselves to assure that task is getting done. And it's just setting aside time to make sure that you're getting done what you need to get done. And I find that my week goes, if I can have my Tuesdays to myself, then I get a lot of work done early in the week. I feel successful, and the rest of my week tends to go better.
A good week. That's great. All right. Next question. Is there a book that stood out for you in terms of your professional development that maybe had an impact on you that over the years, that it could have been yesterday, it could have been years ago, but something that you remember, like a book that you remember?
Well, I pretty early on read Stephen Covey's book.
Okay. 7 Habits.
7 Habits. I don't think in my 20s I understood what a lot of the things he was saying. It's really interesting to go back and reread things, as you're 20 years into your career. But I've reread it a couple of times, and now I try to use those, the information provided to coach younger people on how to, improve their career, and so I always come back to it. Always have a copy of it on my shelf.
That's great. Oh yeah, listen, if it works, those are the kind of books that I get from people a lot, that they're always good. Whether it's now, 10 years later.
And I think it applies to any generation. That as much discussion as there is about intergenerational communication, that even 20-something can understand it.
Right. All right, next question. So you've had managers in the past yourself, I'm assuming, throughout your career, a couple of managers here and there. Is there something that you can think of that stood out for you, like a positive from one of your managers, let's say, that you really liked about that manager? So, I try to ask this question because if we think about the managers we had and we can think about why we like them, we can maybe, or some of our listeners can apply some of these strategies in their own management techniques. So is there something you can think of with one of your managers that they did, not necessarily asking to name names, but just something that they did or some reason that you might have said, man, they were a good manager for me?
Okay. My first job out of college, I had a manager who was similar age to I am now. He interacted with, we had a very young staff. He spent a lot of time interacting with us, both personally and professionally. He was very encouraging to us to go out and get involved. I always recommend to people get involved with the community around you, both personally and professionally. And he was a likable guy. There were times where he had to be tough on us and call us to task for things that as engineers we needed to understand we hadn't done correctly. But it was, sometimes the argument is that it's hard to call people to task when you're friends with them, but right. he had a good mix of friendship and leadership skills.
That's great. And I hear that a lot is that, when a manager really interacted with the staff and engaged with them, that, makes people really remember them. All right, last question. We call it our civil engineering career elevator advice question. You get into an elevator with a civil engineer. You got about 30, 40 seconds with him or her to give some career advice based on your experience so far in your career. What would that advice be?
Two things. One is get involved. In Hawaii, it's very relationship-based.
Right.
When I walked in the door at Coffman, get involved. Go out. Do things that you're passionate about. Outside of the office and things that you're passionate about in our profession and build relationships on that. And the other thing is you got to let some stuff roll off your back because it's a tough business and we're dealing with really smart people and you can't, I learned when you work for a family member, because I worked for my father before I worked for my father-in-law, that you gotta have thick skin sometimes and not take everything so personally.
Great. Well, Jami Hirota, Department Manager, Civil Engineering, Coffman Engineers, thank you so much for coming on the Civil Engineering Podcast. You can find all the episodes of the podcast at civilengineeringpodcast.com, and you could subscribe to our YouTube channel here to get all of our upcoming episodes. And until next time, we hope that you continue in the best of all your civil engineering career endeavors.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Civil Engineering Podcast on YouTube, produced by the Engineering Management Institute. We're always looking for new ways to help engineers become effective managers and leaders. You can view all of our content on our website at engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here for our weekly videos. Until next time, please continue to engineer your own success.